All right, welcome back. So we are going to finish off today with a look at India. And so for India, what's really important is Hinduism. Because India is really in a lot of ways defined by being a very diverse region with a ton of different people, a ton of different sort of local cultures, a large population from very early on. And so anything that happens in India, it's going to have multiple aspects to it. And the Indian religion is known as Hinduism. And Hinduism has a large variety of gods, many, many gods, who are all sort of seen as being compatible with each other in a certain way. This is not a religion that has just one set of ideas where everybody has to be right and listen to the Pope, like Christianity, or some forms of Christianity. This is a tradition that says there are many, many gods. So in that regard, it's a little bit like Shintoism, but also has its own distinct philosophy. And this starts really early on in India, to the point where medieval India is, continuing on with this tradition. In the earliest Hindu texts, we see a sort of relationship of sort of sacrifice and respect towards the gods, give them animal sacrifices. Later on, the idea of animal sacrifices disappears, and instead you have a relationship that's more about giving food and gifts to the gods and worshiping them at their statues. But let's see, where do we want to go with this? Yeah, this is the other big thing that's going on in India is the caste system. There's an idea that everybody in the world is born into a certain family with a certain role to play. So there's the priestly caste, and the people in those families are all supposed to be priests, and they are kind of at the top of the society because they have the proper relationship to the gods. Then you have the warrior caste, the sort of merchant or landowner caste, and then finally you have the peasant caste. And, in some ways, this kind of reminds us a little bit of feudalism. In other ways, it's different, right? The landowners are beneath the priests, and the warriors are above the landowners. It's different sets of relationships. And importantly, this is not supposed to be something that changes over your life. You're really not supposed to change roles in this society because you were kind of born into that role. It's your duty, it's your destiny. Things in modern India have evolved away from this, and the caste system is kind of seen as something from the past. But this was originally one of the core ideas back at the time. They, let's see, where do I want to go with this? So traditionally, also, reincarnation was a big concept in India. And in some ways, this was good. If you die, you'll come back in another life, maybe as an animal, maybe as a human being. But your karma, your sort of what you have done in this life will determine where you go in the next life. And in the next life, maybe you'll get a better incarnation if you've lived a good life in this one. So you could see how that could be reassuring to people that, like, maybe you don't get to be a priest in this lifetime, but in the next lifetime you could be. On the other hand, it could also be a justification, right? Like, why do you want to be a priest? In this incarnation, you're being punished for being a bad person, so you're a peasant. And I should mention also, beneath the peasants, there are the outcasts, the untouchables, who you are not even supposed to interact with or share a drink of water with. So that's pretty bad in terms of the way a society is set up to have a situation like that. But you can kind of understand how it is sort of philosophically justified through the idea of reincarnation. Now, as you go through these lifetimes, you might end up even beyond a human. You might end up all the way into the status of a god, or you might be transformed into some sort of demon if you live a terrible enough lifetime. Indian culture has a lot in common with Greek culture originally. We think if you go far enough back, you can connect both Greek and Roman culture, and even like Germanic culture. You can connect all of them back to a certain original people called the Indo-Europeans, which is pretty interesting. But we don't have to get into that super much. But it is kind of interesting that I think Indian culture, with its tradition of the gods, it kind of reminds me more of ancient Greek stuff than anything else, or even like ancient Germanic stuff before Christianity came along. Now, the big unifying concept that's kind of unique to Hinduism is the idea of Brahman. The idea is basically that all individual souls are one. We are all part of this greater oneness of the universe, and you become a sage to separate yourself from society and connect to this idea of oneness, where we are all part of one same thing. And this is sort of this energy or universe called Brahman. And we recognize that we are a part of it, and it in turn is a part of us. And even the gods are just a part of Brahman. And you might in some reincarnation be able to exist on the level of a god, depending on who you ask. So that's a sort of big philosophical thing that some sort of more philosophical people can strive for, which is an interesting paradox with like, we all have our individual duty, but we are all one. But some people just tend to worship individual gods, and that's not such a bad thing either. I want to mention some of the biggest gods in Hinduism. The sort of big trinity that appears over and over again is the creator, preserver, and destroyer. The creator is Brahma. And funnily enough, even though he's the creator of the universe, he's not as important as the other gods. He is just kind of there when the other two are there. He just started everything off, but you don't worship him by himself usually. Then there's Vishnu, the preserver. Vishnu is usually depicted as being blue, which is kind of interesting, or sometimes dark-skinned. He is the preserver. So he will incarnate into different human beings. He will be born as different great heroes. So when evil monsters threaten existence, Vishnu will take the form of a great hero, often a hero who is blue, and will go and slay the monsters and win the battle, win the day. He's also worshipped in the form of Krishna, who is one of these heroes, and Rama, who is another, and appears in some of the stories. These incarnations are often known as avatars. And Vishnu is basically, in charge of, doing good things in the universe, preserving it. And oftentimes that means going to battle. And then finally we have Shiva, the destroyer. Now the funny thing is people love Shiva. Even though he's a god of destruction, he's a very popular one. And I think the deal is that he kind of helps people make peace with the things that are being destroyed, with decay. You see that, everything passes away, everybody grows old, things disappear, things change. Well, Shiva is a way to make peace with that and say, it's going to be okay. So Shiva is in the middle of this great dance. He is the lord of the dance. He is dancing and fires are all around him and he is kind of destroying the universe. He dances to the beat of a drum, which is kind of the march of time. And he just is sort of in charge of the process of things changing. And another thing he is very involved with is meditation. You disconnect from society and you want to sort of lose your individual self and your individual role and join this sort of greater unity. You might connect to that through Shiva. He is known as someone who meditates and sort of connects to the holy universal Brahman. He's also kind of androgynous. Sometimes he's depicted as both male and female, or in a fusion with his wife Parvati. And one theory is that he started off as a storm god who was called Rudra, and you were basically just praying to him like, don't destroy my crops, don't destroy my farm. But then over time, people developed this religion around him that was much more sort of positive and saying like Shiva will help us, transcend the destruction of things. So that's pretty cool. The last thing I want to mention for Hinduism is sort of the national writings. One of them is the Upanishads, which basically says that, whatever gods you worship, they are all part of the same sort of unified thing. And so the message is, truth is one, but the sages speak of it by many names, and all people are one. Like rivers merging into the ocean, everybody can kind of merge into this universal oneness. Other Hindu stories talk about or other Hindu writings are sort of epic stories like the Greek ancient epics. One of them is the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is the story of two great families or two branches of the same family that go to war with each other. They're fighting over who's going to be king. And this is a story where Vishnu makes a lot of cameo appearances in the form of Krishna. And it's all about this idea of duty and the gods. Like, how do you do your duty? Because these princes, they don't really want to fight their own family members, but they feel like they kind of have to. It's basically a civil war. And so the question is, can you go against your own family, in order to do your duty as a member of the warrior class? And this sort of theme in the Mahabharata is so popular that it's basically spawned its own spin-off, I guess you could say. One section of the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, it goes into basically this whole philosophical construct of, doing your duty versus, being loyal to your family. And this is an idea that's influential in later Hindu philosophy. In Hinduism, philosophers are as important as they are in other parts of the world, like Greece. People who think about what is the right thing to do. And here, Vishnu, in his Krishna form, gives this young warrior who is reluctant to fight his family members this whole sort of philosophical exploration of the nature of duty and what that means. And it culminates in a vision of Vishnu in his true form. And in his true form, Vishnu has like hundreds of heads and hundreds of arms and hundreds of legs. And he is constantly creating and destroying aspects of the universe. The armies are riding in and out of his mouths. And so he's basically saying, all of this whole battle, everything that you're worried about, this is all a part of me. So have faith in me, not necessarily faith in like it's all going to work out okay, but that this is all part of the divine nature of things. You're just playing a role, like you're playing a role in a story. So the way to be religious, the way to connect with this oneness is to do your duty, to play out your role the best you can be, knowing that it's kind of a role. And then by doing that, you'll be connected to the universal oneness of the gods. Now, this is an idea that has been pretty influential in the West as well, when people sort of need to reconcile the idea of doing their duty with trying to find some sort of transcendence, some connection to some sort of greater idea. Finally, with India, I want to talk about how it changes over time, especially during medieval India. One of the big developments is an empire in India emerges, right around the time of the emergence of Buddhism. So maybe you can see how Buddhism connects to some of these themes, only for the Buddhists, the duty is to help people become enlightenment, not to play out your social role. And Buddhism is in some part about escaping your social role. In a later time period of India, we encounter the Maurya Empire. And this is run by a guy named Ashoka. And Ashoka is notable because he is one of the first people in history to preach the idea of tolerance for different religious points of view. He is said to have sort of invited Buddhists and Hindus and all sorts of religions to his court and try to understand them all and try to spread their messages far and wide. Buddhists in particular admire him because he really heavily promoted Buddhism and tried to spread it to other parts of the world. He did this with the edicts of Ashoka. He set up these stone pillars as far away as basically the coast of Judea almost, of the Jerusalem area. That's how far he was able to spread his pillars. And he was basically spreading the messages of Buddhism. So Buddhists in particular love him, but he seemed to respect all these different philosophies and these different religions. And so Buddhists are grateful to him for allowing Buddhism to sort of grow and become the successful religion that it is today. So that's Ashoka for you. And he did it in large part because he had such a big empire in India. The other sort of change in India that I want to mention real briefly here is in the medieval period, which is much later on from here. I'm passing over a lot of time periods in history to talk about India. But in the medieval period, India is finally conquered by people who are not Hindus or Buddhists, but Muslims, in fact. So this is kind of, the religion is not the caliphate anymore, but in the 1500s, India is conquered by a group of people known as the Mughals. The book calls them the Moguls, but I'd like to spell it with a U instead of an O to keep from getting them mixed up with the Mongols, who we're going to talk about in the context of China. But let's just call them the Mughals, and that will prevent some confusion. So this is interesting. Muslim rulers ruling a large part of China. Sorry, not China. Muslim rulers ruling a large part of India. Surprisingly, they get along okay with the Indian people during this time, with Hinduism. They sort of recognize that these are different traditions. And in fact, one of the Mughal leaders, a guy known as Akbar, is kind of famous for inviting all sorts of different people to his royal court. He invites Hindus, he invites Muslims, and he even invites Christians, who you can kind of see over here. Because at this point, Christian Europeans are starting to travel as far as India and even kind of trying to take it over a little bit. And so The Mughal Empire is sort of a more cosmopolitan empire that brings together a lot of different religious traditions. And you can kind of see that in its great works of art. One of the most famous Indian works of architecture is the Taj Mahal. And this is a building founded by a Mughal empire using influences of both Muslim architecture and Indian architecture. You can kind of see the influence of Muslim mosques in the fact that it has these towers, which are known as minarets. Those came from Muslim mosques originally, and were where people were called to come to the mosques to pray. And then you also have sort of these beautiful types of stone, and there's some influence of Hindu palaces as well in here, and this beautiful garden and pool in front. You also have this really impressive dome, which is just like spectacular and kind of bulging out in an onion shape, some people call it. And this is a style of a dome that is going to be popular around the world. So the Taj Mahal is the note I want to leave you with. Medieval India being this sort of complicated mix between Muslim and Hindu cultures and creating beautiful works of art. So far we've looked at a lot of different religions today, and it may be worth thinking about, which one do you resonate with most? Do you feel like any would be a religion that you could get behind? Food for thought. Okay, today we don't have a discussion question, but we do have a quiz. So I'm going to double check that quiz is up, and it should be due by Monday. So the quiz will cover both material on these Asian cultures and material on medieval Europe. So basically things from Tuesday and things from Monday and from Wednesday. So if you have any questions on that or need to review, just want to run some questions by me, feel free to drop me an email. Otherwise, I will see you guys in person on Monday. Have a good one.